Welcome to the Organizational Maneuverability Radio Show, Defying Gravity so your team can soar at altitude, with host Marshall Goldsmith, Executive Coach, Randy Swaim. Hello, as you know, this is Marshall Goldsmith, Certified Executive Coach, and welcome to my Organizational Maneuverability Show, and definitely look forward to it. I think everybody that is listening probably knows my background. I'm a master certified neuroplastician for NPN Hub in terms of the brain and how it works and leading and all that kind of stuff. And I'll tell you what, I will just simply share this very quickly, that very honored to have on Bill Cusato. Is that pronounced correctly, Bill?
Cusato.
Oh, okay, Cusato. Okay, thank you. Very honored to have him on, and I will simply just tell you that as we were chatting, just getting to know each other just a little bit before the show started, there's a degree of alignment to our background and what we're all about. And so I'll tell you what, before we get started, let me give him just a few minutes here and introduce himself, a little bit of his background, so you know who the guest is today. And Bill, welcome to the show, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Randy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And as we were talking, I'm kind of this freak of nature between commercial aviation and maintenance engineering and a private pilot. And I've learned over the last 40 years to transition from technical to more of a people-focused energy. And that's what the last 15 years has been for me, is to transition from a recovering micromanager with great technical depth into leading people and organizations to their potential.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I've led 24/7 organizations for a long time, and I don't get awakened very much in the middle of the night because I build teams that are self-directed and have the support to go take care of what needs to be done.
And that's a huge part of this whole concept of organizational maneuverability, because as people know, organizational maneuverability is a trademark concept, trademark for me out of Washington. But what it does is very aligned with what you just said. It's not everything fits a rote academic picture, kind of thing, and not everything does that. And can your teams can't handle that, and can your teams do it when not everything is expected, kind of thing. And so that's a key part of what you're saying and what you're bringing. That's cool. But you were you have my compliments on doing all three of those, the maintenance, the pilot, and all that, because guess what? You're a busy guy when you were coming up in your journey.
Yeah, I'm kind of a freak of nature. I bounce between the disciplines depending on where my focus and energy was, but I'm a very hands-on leader. And so I like to know what's going on without micromanaging. And so there's a fine balance there between having knowledge to support the team while also providing the guidance and leadership to let them do what you hired them to do. And it's amazing how many people we hire who want to do more, but in the system they find themselves through fear or other cultural things, they're restricted from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about letting go and trusting the team. And I recall a story where I gave one of my colleagues a book, and he gave me another book back that said "Do Nothing," which is about how to stop micromanaging and really trust the team. And it's interesting to watch how people do that in that evolution. And it's been my experience that you can take even hardened, feared individuals and unleash them. It takes about a year or two, depending on the culture, and really get in their untapped potential. And then they blossom into amazing leaders and better citizens of their community and better spouses. And it's an individual one-on-one thing that I've found to get people to go from that pure technical to understanding the why. Simon Sinek, start with why. That my mantra has been that although we're in largely technical things, we are in the people business.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're connecting with people at work, we're connecting with customers, or we're connecting with a variety of regulators, and to build trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is key. And I know you kind of talked a little bit about it before we started recording and stuff. And that is key, but it's also key for the highest people, the highest leaders in your organization to understand some of that. And what stands in the way of organizationals really becoming that? What are some of the things in your experience and your awareness that sometimes stand in the way to prevent that uh, from really becoming effective in your group?
Well, we in the aviation business, largely people get promoted because they're really good at the job they're doing.
Yep. And guess what?
And,
That's a well part of our society in a lot of
right.
ways. Yeah.
And I've coached a lot of people when they've gotten promoted. In fact, when I've given them a promotion, I'm like, okay, what are you going to stop doing in your old job that you identified with, were really good at, but is not part of your new job? What
Hmm.
email distribution list are you going to exit from? What things are you no longer going to attend? And the mind shift about preparing people for that next level from managing people who do work to managing managers. I find
Hmm.
that the biggest shift is going into middle management because you so identify with the technical, but that's not your job anymore. And I see that people are not necessarily coached on how to transition from that. There's a lot of leadership training, but how does it fit into that culture? And I'm reminded of an individual who was waiting outside my office for some period of time, and I was in between meetings and had to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, do you have 30 seconds? And he asked me, and I'm like, I do, but barely. And he asked me some things, and I'm like, what were you going to do if I didn't walk by my office at that point in time on a Tuesday morning?
Hmm.
I, you're a senior manager. I expect you to make those decisions. And the look on his face was amazing. He had never been tasked with that before because
Hmm.
he was so used to seeking approval and decision making high above him. And so there was a cultural shift we had to go through for him as an individual, but the team. And I was purposeful in that because I wanted him to tell his colleagues, this
Yeah.
is how I roll. I expect you to make these decisions, and I'm here to help, but you have much more knowledge than I do. So go do your job.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very interesting. I'll just share this, very kind of aligned with kind of what you were talking about there. There was a situation. I think I shared this on the show some time back, but when I was a site manager at Griffiths Air Force Base with our Learjet team and everything, um, I was standing there and I was the manager, but the flight crews and the even the maintenance people were standing around sort of talking about it, and I could tell they were exploring something they wanted to be aware of and maybe something they wanted to do a little bit differently and all of this sort of stuff, but they were asking good questions about, you know, is that going to be successful? Is that really what we need to do? And I'm just sitting there listening because I can tell where they're going in my
Mm-hmm.
ears, kind of thing. Then what was amazing is the guy that actually, he and I were both F4 backseaters, kind of thing. He was up in Michigan, I think, at the time, and but he was also a pilot for our Learjets there, and he kind of had a piece of paper and a pen. And he was going over and sitting down. He said, "I'm going to take some notes." And he sat down, but halfway down he froze and he just looked over at me like this. And all I did is I looked at him, and all I did is I winked and I nodded my head, kind of thing. And he sat down and started taking some notes. And so that, but that is very key when you're, as you kind of implied, where you kind of get your team moving in that direction also. And what are some of the advantages of that from your experience in the teams that you've worked with and led and things like that?
Well, the advantages and the leverage is stuff gets done. And I equate it to the baby bird story. I have a colleague who I've worked with for many years,
Hmm.
and he goes and solves things and comes to me afterwards and says, this was the problem, and this is what I did. It's kind of like when the cat brings you the baby bird on the back step. You didn't know
Hmm.
you needed a baby bird, but the cat did. And you want
Yeah.
to reward that behavior that
Hmm.
the person anticipated the problem, solved it, and briefed me on what I needed to know. The other thing that I'm drawn to is Oscar Munoz, the former CEO of United Airlines. His mantra was
Hmm.
listen, learn, listen again, and then lead. And I found that very compelling because as promoted leaders, we're being tasked with going to solve problems and do things. But again, we're in an environment where we probably don't know what's going on, much like Captain Marquet of the Navy on the Santa Fe, where he
Hmm.
had to learn a whole new submarine to be an
Hmm.
effective leader. And he had to trust his team because he was trained on a different submarine. So
Yeah.
one of the techniques I learned years ago was I took this handkerchief, it was my FedEx handkerchief here,
Oh, cool.
and I used it as an immunity idol in meetings. When people were afraid to speak up, I would throw this on the table and say, here's your immunity idol. This allows you deference from the group to speak your mind. And everyone is then visually signaled to take a step back, take a
Mm-hmm.
deep breath, and allow this individual to be vulnerable. And it was amazing to watch over a period of time how people would reach for it. It was very deliberate. They
Mm-hmm.
would test it. And then the flag would sit in the middle of the table, and somebody would just say, I'm throwing the flag. Part of the culture of an open and transparent. And that's when I knew we were reaching people and getting their untapped potential. Then I brought another group into that meeting. I inherited another group of managers, and they witnessed this. And it was like watching a foreign language because they were
Wow.
so unfamiliar with how to be open and transparent in front of the boss that it
Mm-hmm.
took them 6 or 8 months to really trust it. And of course, they had to talk to colleagues. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's some visual things you can do in the workplace, like, things that allow people to feel safe. And I think
Yeah.
ultimately that's what it is how do you make people feel safe to speak up about defects that everybody knows is there
Yeah.
that we're afraid to talk about?
And you just have my compliments on what you said that because that has been such a key part in my history. Because people realize that they can come to me and have a conversation with me, and they don't have to worry about me threatening them or kicking them out or anything like that. That I'll listen to them, and I'll usually ask a question or two after that. So it's very aligned with kind of what you're saying. But you know what? The way that you engender that in your team is by getting people to where they feel like they can communicate really, even when it's kind of tough situations, and still feel synergistic, kind of thing. And that's what you said, what you implied there is very key to what you're saying. And that is very needed for people to realize, particularly that are trying to become leaders today.
It really is, but it takes a constancy of purpose.
Yeah.
And I had a boss a couple decades ago. He said, Bill, whatever you do when you walk through security, be the same, be consistent. Being inconsistent is the death blow of an organization.
Oh, okay.
And so he says, if you're going to be a tyrant, you got to be a tyrant all the time. But if you're going to be nice, you got to be, or the
Yeah.
servant leader was the mantra at
Yeah.
FedEx. You had to be consistent so the employees and the managers know what to expect when they come to work. I used to coach people that when we come to work at our facility at FedEx, it's the most stable and predictable part of their day. They
Hmm.
know what time they clock in, they go to break, they go to meal, they leave. Once they leave, they're going to pick up their kids, they're on the freeway, whatever it
Hmm.
is. So how do we create stability within the workplace so they can focus on what we need them to do?
Hmm.
That's what I found really it was imperative to create a stable environment through continuous improvement and suggestions and servant leadership so that people could do their best work because that's what we hired them to do.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, just when, if you don't mind me just saying this, with when you look at your journey and all that kind of stuff, because that is huge. You and I, we've already said this. That is huge, and we both kind of look at that, and that's very central to what we both see and envision, and all that. And that is, you have my compliments on that. But let me
Thank
ask
you.
you this: with everything that you said, that you're a maintenance, you're a pilot, and all that kind of stuff, and all that kind of stuff. Is there a particular point in your journey where you started to catch a vision of that and you said, "Oh gosh, you know what? I need to go in this direction," kind of thing? Was there anything like that that kind of created that and perhaps set the stage for people you were going to work with going forward?
Yeah, there was, Randy. There was a period of time back in probably 2009ish, if I remember correctly,
Hmm.
where I was faced with some really significant disagreement with my boss. And I was at a fork in the road. I'm like, I either got to compromise my values or I've got to go all in with my team and demonstrate that my position is the better way to go. Not
Hmm.
necessarily right, but a better way to go.
Hmm.
And I had to completely put all my chips in with the team, and I went that direction. And it was also at a time when I had to do some travel, so I was out of the office for about a month. And I came back after from vacation and a business trip, and I was on the shop floor. And one of the managers, who I had had some challenges with, he came to me. He said, "Bill, we like where you're going with this. We
Mhm.
don't believe you can continue to do it, but we like what we see. So bear in mind that everybody's watching every day. And I looked at this individual again, who I had had some challenges with, and
Mhm.
I thanked him for being comfortable enough to say that to me, because the fact that he felt comfortable to say, be transparent and be vulnerable with me, meant I was making progress with him as an individual, and I knew he would share that with his colleagues. I thought that was a watershed moment in my leadership journey, shifting from micromanaging, technically focused, to really enabling and emancipating the team. That's the term that Captain Marquet uses, is you don't just empower, you emancipate. And once you emancipate a leadership team, you don't go back.
There you go. And I'll tell you, if you don't mind me saying so, you're very right on that. And if you think about it, what you were doing when you made that choice to go in that direction, what you were doing is actually modeling true leadership and modeling true success and modeling the behavior for your team, kind of thing. And that you kind of mentioned this, that how the people feel differently when you have that different interaction there and all that, and that is huge.
When the team feels supported, they'll do amazing things. And that was the beginning of a multi-year run where we had record performance. That's the interesting thing about this, is some people describe these leadership and people engagement techniques as soft stuff. I
Hmm.
refer to them as essential business skills if you want to get maximum performance out of an organization.
Hmm.
And so it isn't, these aren't just nice to have. These are essential things to get what are the business goals of an organization, which is to get more stuff out the door, whatever it is, whether it's data, airplanes,
Hmm.
widgets, get more stuff out the door is the business plan.
And if you think about that, when you're talking about somebody who's a manager, particularly in a organization that's perhaps and let's face it, most of the environments today have a degree of this organizational maneuverability concept and everything. But let me ask you this: what's the one or two things? Because you've mentioned some behavior stuff, no two ways about it. Yep, absolutely, and some thinking. But when you look at the typical managers out there that are becoming, maybe looking to go into the next position or whatever, what are some of the things that they've got to do differently? And I don't mean just act, but I mean, what do they need to become differently, and how can you create that in them? When you're talking about them, when you're talking about people that work for you right now, but they want to go up and become a senior manager for your organization or whatever.
Well, it's interesting. The higher we go up in the organization, the more social it becomes,
Hmm.
and the more horizontal it becomes. So one of my interview questions I ask aspiring managers who want to become senior managers or directors is, give me an example of where you led something horizontally that was not part of your direct authority. And it really is difficult for people to come up with examples. Most of the time they revert back to a direct linear vertical example of getting something done, when I'm really looking
Sort of
for
sort of selling themselves.
right. I'm
Yeah.
looking for an example where they went to their colleague who they had no organizational authority over and elicited their support on something that was good for the greater organization,
Hmm.
and led horizontally to something that, again, the baby bird example. So that's what I look for, is the transition from managing vertically down to leading horizontally and getting support, not unlike legislative bodies that have to garner support. How
Hmm.
do you get your colleagues who may not like you, who may not be interested in what you have to offer, who are probably in competition for that same promotion? How do
Hmm.
you get them to buy into your idea? And I use that as a pretty distinctive question in interviews about how people are filtered horizontally.
Good deal. How many people kind of have an idea where they may have thought about that when you're interviewing them? And you don't have to give me names or numbers or anything like that, but just in general, uh, what do you experience in people where you're asking that? Because everything you're talking about is hugely critical in today's world.
Oh, I would say the success rate in that question was well below 50%.
I can believe it.
And what was also interesting, Randy, is afterwards, I take a great deal of interest in giving the unsuccessful candidates a debrief question by question about what I was looking for. And in almost every case, the response was, gee, Bill, I wish someone had given me that feedback 5 or 10 years ago. I would have done it differently.
Yeah.
I think organizations really struggle with having a difficult, what they think are difficult conversations, when in fact, the unsuccessful candidates are looking for real feedback. Most of the time they get, oh, it's not your time, you didn't do quite as well. But giving them real feedback allows them to go and improve their game. And similarly, when I offer a job to a successful candidate, I specifically tell them why I chose them. And I give
Cool.
them, in that, when I'm giving them the letter, I said, these are the top 3 things you are to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the organization needs. And I select candidates around what the organization needs to be effective. What is that team struggling with? And it may
Mm-hmm.
be that that candidate isn't necessarily the best in a particular area, but that he or she is the right fit for what that team needs at that time,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm thinking about the team performance. So I make it very clear to that candidate. So when they go home and talk to their family about getting this job, there's no fuzz on the peach about what the boss wants. And that brings us
Mm-hmm.
back to, when you get a new job, is, and I was texting my son last night, he's meeting his boss today. I'm like, what does success look like from the boss's perspective?
Mm-hmm.
You may have great ideas, but the boss's thoughts need to be foremost around, how do we click here? So I'm very clear with the candidates that are unsuccessful and those that are successful about what just happened. And everyone has thanked me, over the years around, gee, I wish I'd had this kind of feedback years earlier.
Because that is sort of uncommon, no two ways about it. That's true. And I will tell you that if I could just share one little tiny example of that from my background. I was the site manager at Griffiths Air Force Base I mentioned, and we had one guy. Most of the guys that were the aviators in our team are ex-military people, and that kind of thing and everything. But we had one guy that was in the military, but he was not an aviator, nothing. Well, we wore kind of tan flight suits and everything, kind of thing. And but he actually had started wearing pilot wings up here, Air Force pilot wings. And the amazing thing about it is that the team was just going nuts. I don't mean in a malicious way or a dysfunctional way, but you could tell they were ticked off at it and everything. And I went in and I asked them to be in this one room here, and I went in and I sat down. I said, "Listen, I want you to realize that this is sort of a disciplinary nature, just for a second." And I said, "I want you to understand the impact that's having on people." And I said, "You need to take that off and don't use it anymore."
Right.
And what was amazing, to make a long story short, the next morning I was in my office, and he knocked on the door, and I said, "Come on in." And he came in and he closed the door. He said, "Listen," he said, "Randy," he said, "I thought about what we were talking about and everything." He said, "Is there any way that this can't go beyond us to the higher level people?" And I said, "Nobody besides us knows anything about this,
Mhm.
because they don't need to know."
Right.
And he looked at me, he said, "I'll go with what you said." I said, "Fair enough. We're good to go." And he walked out, and the whole nature of the team had become so synergistic, and everything. Uh, and I was actually lauded as one of the top, one of the managers of one of the top bases in the country for the operations that we did and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit of kind of what you're saying about when you got to connect with those people, and it's not about being militant or a little control freakish or anything like that, but it's connecting with them in such a way where you can help them get a sense of what they need to do, and it's kind of aligned with what you're talking about.
Yeah, connecting is a key phrase. When I went through the John Maxwell training for coaching, there's a book he has. Is that everyone communicates, few connect. Not sure
Mm-hmm.
everyone communicates, but the few connection part is really relevant. Is that you made a connection there,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a one-on-one. It was discreet, and it had an exponential positive impact,
Mm-hmm.
because you saw something, you were curious. And that's another term that was kind of drilled into my head by a former boss who I have great respect for. Is be more curious and less certain. I think
Yeah.
that's part of the challenge is we get promoted for all the good things we know, and we become
Hmm.
less curious about what the team really needs. And that's all ultimately what I think servant leadership is about is helping the team be successful, getting them what they need, not necessarily what they want, but what they
Yeah.
need to be effective and to grow as individuals and as a team. And one of the other techniques that I really glommed onto was a book called The Coaching Habit. And I had an organization years ago where employees were skipping and declining one on ones with their manager.
Ah.
And I went down, I was walking the floor. I said, "What's going on? Why are you skipping your one on ones?" He goes, "Well, when I go to my one on one with my boss, it comes a business review meeting and they just give me more work."
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, now I get it. So one on ones are really about the subordinate in the organization in that conversation. It's the
Hmm.
chance for the subordinate, the employee and the manager, for the employee to share what's ever on their mind and ask for help and be vulnerable. But if the manager's giving him more work, more tasks, then why do I want to go to my boss's office? I'm just going to get more stuff to do because my plate's already overfull. And
Yeah.
so I had to redirect to several managers and senior managers about what is a one on one. It's about the employee's time to be vulnerable and to seek help and support. And, I had to, took me a while to kind of change that tie, but it was an interesting thing about why are people not going to a one on one? Because they didn't like what was happening.
Yeah, yeah. And it's how the managers do it. And guess what? The leader is the one that can change all of that.
Right.
And that's no two ways about it. So that's good. Like I said, you brought a really good point today. Let me just ask you this, because I know we're getting close to our 30 minutes and stuff, but you have my compliments on what you brought. But let me just let you take a couple of minutes and anything you want for the listeners to take away, kind of thing. What are some things that you'd like for them to take away from our session today?
Well, I think the overarching thing is that regardless of what business you're in, you and I have airplanes in common, and we were
Hmm.
drawn to airplanes. But at the end of the day, we're in the people business, whether
You know
it's
what? Thank
customers,
you. Thank
bosses,
you.
horizontally, employees. Nothing gets done without people. Even in the world of AI, at the end of the day, that conversation you talked about was that coaching, a directed coaching session
Hmm.
for a few minutes. And that's one of the challenges of remote work is you're missing those hallway conversations. Hey, let's talk
Hmm.
on the way to the coffee pot or
Hmm.
after a meeting. So I'm not a big fan of complete remote, but I'm also understand that hybrid's a good way to go in that sometimes people do things that require a lot of focus and
Hmm.
workspaces can be chaotic. So there's a kind of a blend there, but ultimately we're in the people business and we have to
Hmm.
be thoughtful around how we connect with each individual because one size doesn't fit all. And so we
Hmm.
need to be curious about what it takes to connect with those individuals so that they can be comfortable and confident they're being supported so they'll go do the things we hired them to do. It's really
Yeah.
about organizational effectiveness so that people do what they're paid to do and the boss can get a good night's sleep. And I'm reminded of a story that Ray Connor, the former president of Boeing, said if
Hmm.
a Boeing field rep is having a bad day, the Boeing company's having a bad day. So I
Yep.
had the mindset of how do I help the field reps get a good night's sleep? Because if the field reps getting a good night's sleep, the Boeing company in that part of the world is okay.
Yep. Yep. And I tell you, if anybody on your team is having a bad, stressful day, guess what? Your team's not as effective as it could have been, and it's very aligned with
Absolutely,
what you just said.
and that spreads.
Yeah, it
So one
does.
of the, so one of the things I'll part this with is when people come to work is with a mindset, how can I help my neighbor?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm done
Yep.
for the day and I've got all my stuff done, maybe I should look around and see if I can help my neighbor.
Yeah, you know what? And that's huge. And that's kind of like an ongoing mindset. It's not just something you do at the point of attack. It's your mindset, it's your spirit. It's about kind of what you do, what you're aware of and how you're doing that. And so yeah, very aligned with what you're saying there. Cool, cool. Well, listen, I know it's getting close to the 30 minutes, so let me just do this. You have my compliments on everything you brought today and
Thank
the,
you.
the image of it. But let me just let you take a minute and just, again, mention to the listeners your name. If they want to reach out and contact you and you want to share, some of your contact information, feel free to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy. It's been a pleasure this morning to connect with you and share some of my journey of the last 40 years, particularly the last 15 years. And as I say, I've transitioned from a very technical micromanager into more leadership focused.
Mhm.
And it's been very rewarding for me as an individual, particularly as I get to the latter part of my career. And I'm available through LinkedIn if people want to connect with me and talk in more detail. But all these books you see behind me were a lot of what I've read in the last 15 years and applied. And when I did have people do book reports, I'm like, I know what the book is, but tell me how you're going to apply it. How are you going to grow
Mhm.
as an individual that your team will feel? And ultimately, if we're making those slight changes, we can make the world a better place.
Cool. Well, I'll tell you what, you have my compliments on that, Bill. And listen, I know we're about to close down, but it's been a pleasure and honor having you here. And maybe we'll look forward to, who knows, having a conversation again sometime.
Thank you, Randy. It's been my pleasure. You have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.